All right, guys. I'm going to get started. So I'm going to go through our purchase agreement, how to fill it out. I'm going to give you guys a heads up now. I haven't updated the contract in this loop where I'm teaching the class out of. So there are a few changes in our nothing significant, but there's a few changes there in our purchase agreement that aren't reflected in this class. I just need it's the purchase agreement in your loops will be correct. Just I need to update it in this loop for us. Feel free to stop me if you guys have questions. Just interrupt me. I'm not that formal. And we've got a couple people here in the room too that are in person. So if they ask questions, I'll just repeat it for you guys on Zoom. All right, so I'm going to start. It's not a dot loop class, but hopefully you guys all know how to set up your loop. So I'm not going to go through how to do that, but just know that all these forms are in dot loop, and this is how relatively speaking, this is what your loop should look like. First document is your checklist. So this is really just for your own internal use. This is telling you what's required and what's not required. Some of this has been updated, like a COVID addendum is no longer a requirement. When you pull your checklist, it's correct. This is just needs updating. So documents that are required and documents that may be needed. So if you're doing an FHA or VA FHA or VA financing for your buyer, then you'll need the right addendums for that. If it's a condo, if it's an unrepresented buyer or unrepresented seller, these documents are not required on every transaction, but they're required on the ones where they're relevant. So if you have an unrepresented buyer, if somebody comes in, if somebody comes in on your listing and you're writing the offer for them and they are not a represented buyer, then the unrepresented buyer agreement is a requirement. Same thing with seller. If you're selling a for sale by owner and you're representing only the buyer, that unrepresented seller agreement then becomes a requirement. So it just says as needed because not every deal has an unrepresented buyer or seller. Consumer guide to agency is the next document in here. So we all know this is supposed to be given at the first time that we meet somebody before we talk about anything confidential with them. They need to see the consumer guide and they need to sign it. There is an exception to presenting it on the first time we meet. Anybody want to say what that exception is? Open house, right? So if you meet them at an open house, you're not expected to carry a bunch of consumer guides and pass it out to everybody who walks through the door. But outside of that, you should. In fact, when I talk to somebody, I've done this several times with the for sale by owners. And if I'm on the phone with them trying to schedule an appointment, I also tell them, hey, I have a couple documents I need you to sign before I show it. The first is going to be a consumer guide to agency relationships, and that just says how I work as an agent in the state of Ohio and what my fiduciary responsibilities are if I'm representing a buyer or a seller. The second document would be that unrepresented seller agreement that basically tells you that I don't represent you, I don't owe you these fiduciary responsibilities. I don't tell me anything confidential because I will spill the beans to my client because I do have my fiduciary responsibility with the buyer. So I would send this via dot loop to e-sign before I even meet with that seller the first time, before I walk through that doorway to their house.
Question. I think I know the answer, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
So if you presented it like you're supposed to and they say, I'm not signing anything.
That's fine. If they, so the question is what if they say I'm not signing anything? I always tell people that this is not a contract. This is just the state of Ohio requires that I give this to everybody the first time we meet, and it explains what my duties are when I represent a seller or when I represent a buyer or if I'm a dual agent. Signing it's not a contract. And if they still say, nope, I'm not comfortable signing it, that's fine. You just write refuse to sign, and you can put your initials and date there so that if you get audited, that it's in there that you presented it. And if you send it through .loop, you also have a record in .loop that you shared it. If they opened it, you know that they've at least looked at it. So I would make sure you keep that too. Keep everything in .loop so you have that history.
So then as a follow-up, like, what if they don't say the words, I'm not signing this, but they still don't sign it? You know what I mean? Like you said.
Yeah, if they're slow to sign it and you want to go on that appointment, you've made the appointment and they haven't signed it before you got to the house, I would probably call them and say, hey, can you sign this, please? And if they aren't responsive, I would take it in paper with you to that appointment and ask them again when you're there with them. And then if they, yeah, I mean, I would try. It's not good to just write, I wouldn't just write refuse to sign, because that could, you know.
Somebody refused, I brought them in paper.
Mhm.
And the guy was like, I'm not signing that.
That's fine. So then you just write refuse to sign. Then I would write the client's name or the person's name, refuse to sign, and then the date, and you can sign it or initial it, so that if you get the point is that if you get audited, you presented it to that consumer. So, all right. The next document, agency disclosure. So we fill this out with the property address at the top, the buyer's name, the seller's name. Do we all know how to fill this out? The 3 sections. The first section, if this is what we use most of the time, two agents, 2 different brokerages. Keisha from Keller Williams Living, Joe from Howard Hanna, representing the seller, right? So you just fill in top section. That's what happens 99% of the time, I think. Maybe not. Maybe I just made up that stat, but that's what happens most of the time. Section 2 would be Keisha and I are doing a deal together, so we're in the same brokerage. When that happens, we fill out section 2 and we fill out the top section of section 2. So Keisha's working with the buyer, Rick is working with the seller. We check this box here that we each represent our own client, and we both maintain our fiduciary duties to our own clients. We would never use this bottom section. This would be if every agent within our brokerage represented both parties. We don't do that here. I don't know. I've been at 2 brokerages in my career and neither one of them ever did that. I don't know. I would think maybe some of the smaller brokerages maybe act as a team. Like if you think of these small mom and pop brokerages are like essentially like one of our teams here at Keller Williams, but it's the entire brokerage. Yeah. They might have some policy like that, but I don't know. But for our purposes today, we're only using the top section of section 2 if both of the buyer's agent, seller's agent are at KW Living. And then section 3 would be that you're the only agent involved. Either you're a dual agent or you're only representing the buyer or seller. That's when you would use section 3. You would say agent Rick Tannenbaum, brokerage Keller Williams Living. And then you have to know, are you a dual agent? Are you representing both parties? And you check this first box. And if it's like a FSBO, then you would check the bottom box and say that you only represent the buyer. Or if it's or if you're only representing the seller, somebody's unrepresented, then you check that you only represent the seller. This is a contract, so this needs to be signed. So make sure that your client, both buyers and sellers, are signing. That's one. Here's a statement about dual agency on that. There should probably be a whole nother separate class on how to be a dual agent, but that's not going to be today's class. And then we get into so this next 5 or 6 pages is going to take me a while to get through with you guys. So bear with me. And then after we get through this, it's going to be smooth sailing from here on out. Okay. So, filling this out, I'm sorry. Oh, it's okay. So filling this out, obviously the first line, you fill in your buyer's name. they're offering to buy 123 Main Street in Solon, Ohio, and the parcel number. I'll get all that information out of the MLS.
Quick question, it's funny to me that there's no, spot for the zip code, so don't worry about putting the zip code there.
No,
Just
don't worry about the zip code. Yeah, the question was, where do we put the zip code? Don't worry about it. It's not required in here. But the parcel number, make sure you have the right parcel number though. You're buying the property as is, including any defects that are in the property. When I explain this to my seller or to my buyers, they usually say, wait a second, what do you mean I'm buying it as is with any defects? And I say, don't worry, we're going to talk about your inspection contingency coming up here soon, but that's what this language talks about. And this is important here. It talks about what's included in the property. So all the fixtures are included, and here even though you're putting check marks next to some of these items, like your appliances or your fireplace or whatever, here's a list of other things that are always included in the sale: the electrical, the heating, the air conditioning, plumbing, bathroom fixtures, all window and door shades, blinds, awnings, screens. Big one is landscaping. I've had somebody, the seller, say, oh, I brought this rose bush from the old country, so I'm taking it with me to my new house. And the buyer came to move in and there was a giant rose bush missing. And she said, well, that wasn't a fixture. It's not attached to the house, but it's attached to the property. And it specifically says here, all landscaping. And then of course, the other items, these aren't necessarily fixtures, but you can include, if it's the kitchen refrigerator, dishwasher, washer, dryer, all existing window treatments, ceiling fans, that stuff.
The window treatment then different from doors?
No, it's redundant. Yeah, so it already says that up here. I always check all existing window treatments, unless, I mean, I've also had somebody say, well, these curtains in this one particular bedroom are meaningful and we want to take it, and then we just exclude it. But yeah, so other chattel that's included. So chattel, for those who don't know, is just a fancy word for personal property. So if there's an above ground pool, we've written it in there. If it's not an above ground pool, even if it's an in-ground pool, but there's all sorts of pumps and equipment to it, a hot tub, you can write in there if it's not attached. Pool tables might be added in there. The one thing I caution everybody when we fill this out is if you're adding chattel in there and your buyer is getting financing, just be careful, because the lender is going to say, cool, you negotiated the pool table, but we're not financing the pool table for you. So it appraised for the right price, but now we're going to assume that pool table is worth $2,000, and now all of a sudden you're short on your appraisal. So if you do use this section, just be careful. And I always include the pool table, which has no value. Obviously, the buyer and seller know that there's value to it, but then the lender's not going to cause that to be an issue with your appraisal. If there's fixtures that the seller is taking with them, like I said, maybe it's the master bedroom curtains are being excluded, you can write that in here. If there's a particular light fixture that they're taking the dining room chandelier, you can exclude that here. Again, light fixtures is probably the most common one that I see people exclude. So if you are excluding that, if the seller's excluding that, in this class we're pretending we're representing a buyer, I would probably suggest to your buyer that if they're taking a light fixture, that they don't just remove it and leave you wires hanging out of the ceiling. Put in new fixture, or at the very minimum, properly cap the wires, so that you don't have live wires just dangling out of your ceiling. Secondary offer. If this is a secondary offer, for those of you who don't know, secondary offer would be seller already accepted my offer, but you come in with a backup offer. That would be the secondary offer. I can tell you I've never actually had one of these happen, but if you guys want to use it, you can just say it is a secondary offer, and that you have to become the primary offer by on or before filling a calendar date here. And that way, essentially what happens is when that deal falls apart because they backed out after inspections or their financing didn't go through, the seller doesn't put the property back on the market. They call you up and say, Tunisia, your buyer is now in position. We're under contract with you.
And so, I guess my question is, do they have to give you a confirmation that they're accepting your secondary offer before that date? I mean, obviously before that date happens, but I mean, do you just automatically jump into place? Because it seems like they might want to accept other offers, or do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand what you're asking. So the question is how do you become the primary after when you're a secondary now? How do you become a primary offer? So the seller, the listing agent will notify you in writing that
They've accepted your offer.
that yeah, that the last deal fell apart and now you're in place.
Right, because they could get two secondary offers or something and choose between them, right?
I would probably not suggest doing that.
No, I mean,
No,
if I put one in and see her client wants to put one in as a
So you
secondary,
get notified.
then they would look at those and like select one of the.
Yeah,
two.
I would be careful having more than one secondary offer.
If you were representing the seller is what you're saying.
Mhm.
Okay.
So we wouldn't necessarily know that they have more secondary offers if we're representing the buyer.
You wouldn't necessarily know, but I also think it's unethical to, if I've accepted your offer as a backup and my primary deal fell apart, how can both of you guys be my backup offer? So I think, yes, I accepted Tunisia's secondary offer now, and Tunisia's now the primary. You probably would never know because it's not going to go back on the market. And you didn't know who the first buyer was, and you don't know who the second buyer is, and you don't even necessarily know. But I also think it's unethical, and I wouldn't want our agents to do that. Yeah.
And then follow from there, just, okay, so you're representing the seller, you have a secondary offer, somebody else comes through a day later with a secondary offer, you would tell that second person, we've already had a secondary offer that we've accepted, and we cannot accept your secondary offer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I think so. All right. Purchase price. You'll fill in your number here, what your buyer wants you to fill in. Earnest money. I always check wired funds to the escrow agent. You can also do check made payable to the escrow agent, whichever one is your preference. I never use a note. I just don't think that a note would be appropriate. Because so it's due within 4 days of an accepted contract. If you checked wired, I always check wired. I think this is kind of a gray area. Most title companies, my clients aren't actually wiring it. My buyers are actually going on. Most title companies' websites has the ACH, I think they call it, or direct deposit or whatever, where you just put in your checking account information. I guess that's kind of a gray area, whether it's wired or whether that would be considered a check. But either way, that's how I prefer to have my clients do it. If they are writing a physical check, that then they should send you a picture of it. They can hide the account information from you if they'd like to, but they should send you a picture of that check and mail it directly to the title company. We do not ever accept earnest money at our brokerage. It's some brokerages will take it. We don't. It's too much of a liability. I don't want to have that for us. So it goes to the title company always. How much earnest money would you do? I don't know. I usually do like 1% or somewhere between 1% and 2% of the purchase price. Obviously, I explained to my buyer that the more money uses earnest, the better, stronger your offer looks to the seller. Just you've got more skin in the game, right? You're less likely to walk away from $10,000 because you got cold feet, where you might be willing to walk away from $500 if you get cold feet. So the more money here, the stronger your offer looks. Your cash down payment, while you can write in a dollar amount, I usually write a percentage. It might be 3.5% or more. It might be 20% or more. It might be 50%, whatever your client is planning to put down. I usually, most of the time I put it down as a percentage of the purchase price and then balance under mortgage loan to be obtained.
When you're talking about the percentage of cash down payment, like, wouldn't that have been something that either the buyer lets you know what they're supposed to be putting, or maybe you have a conversation with the lender, but like, it's not.
Yeah, so if your pre-approval says that, yes, your buyer's been approved for a $200,000 purchase price with 3.5% down payment, you can put in 3.5%, or you can put in 3.5% or more, just because they might choose to do more. Now, if you choose to do less, it might potentially be a problem. So in other words, if I say I'm going to put 20% or more, and then through the process, I decide I'm actually going to put 10% down. You can, and I don't think the seller is going to care one way or another, because as long as you get financing. But if you don't qualify for the loan anymore because you're putting, you presented that you're going to put 20% down, and now you're denied for the loan because you're putting 10% and you don't qualify for that loan anymore with a 90% loan amount, then the seller's got a problem. So as long as you qualify, I don't think anybody cares how much you put down. But so I would say that you need to be careful that, you know, your client knows that they're putting at least 20% down, because if they go 10 and the lender says no, they have to be prepared to do 20, because that's not going to be a good reason to back out of the contract with your finance contingency. Then the loan type, conventional, FHA, VA, cash, those are pretty self-explanatory. There's an other box here. The one thing I just want to say here is just know how your clients are buying the property. Hard money loan is not cash. That's not a cash offer. I would click, if somebody was getting a private loan or a hard money loan, I would check the other box, and here you could put in private lender, something, whatever is appropriate, hard money lender, private lender, you can put in other. A lot of agents get confused that hard money is a cash offer. It's not. It's somebody else's cash, but they might have their own underwriting requirements. So yeah.
This might sound like a stupid question, but in 43, if they are providing all cash, what do you write typically in that line?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, so then cash down payment. So if it's an all cash offer, what do you put on line 41 and 43? If it's an all cash offer, I'm sorry, I got that. I said that backwards. If it's an all cash offer on line 41, you would put 100%. On line 43, you could put 0.
Okay.
Or if it's a $200,000 purchase price, you know, here, we can do this example. You're buying the house for 200,000. You're putting 10,000. That's too much, as I just said. Let's say $4,000 in earnest money, and then online, and we're gonna say that was to be wired, the 4,000, and this is a cash offer. So I'm gonna put here 196, because 4,000 plus 196 is our purchase price of 200.
Okay, so you put the amount less than-
Alternatively, you can put in 100% and 0, or if this was financed, you can do any combination of that. Good.
I was gonna ask on the other, if somebody was doing seller financing, is that where you put that?
No, if they're doing, the question is what if they're doing seller financing, and if they're doing seller financing, you need to get an attorney involved to draft up a mortgage document. Yeah.
The buyer would need to do that, or I'm assuming.
Well, I guess if it's seller financing, you should still have an attorney draw up the mortgage document for you guys, but I guess you'll know that they're putting how much down payment. So on the same deal, let's say you're getting seller financing and you're putting down, let's say you're putting down 50%, loan amount is 50%, financing type other, and you would have seller finance.
contract for.
Yeah, they
that,
would, I
so-
mean, yeah, there'd have to be a contract for that mortgage, just like there is with any bank. Um, and, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
But you can still use this for all these different contingencies. It would just be for the.
That's for the
actual financing of it.
financing part of it, yeah. And here's the finance contingency down a couple paragraphs. So before we get to the finance contingency is electronic data security. This just basically says, look, we're never going to ask you to wire any money to anywhere. I should rephrase that. We're not going to give you any wire instructions. We'll tell you you need to wire that $4,000 earnest money to the title company. You're going to get those wire instructions from the title company. If you ever get an email from me saying, this is timely since we just had my text messages hacked and hopefully nobody bought any gift cards. But yeah, I mean, these hackers are smart, right? They're finding a way into our emails. They're going, oh, Tunisia's got a client named Rick who just went under contract on 123 Main Street. Here's some wire instructions. It's going to look like it's coming from Tunisia. And I'm going to get it and say, okay, cool. I need to wire my $4,000 earnest money. I got the wire instructions. I send it off and that money's gone. It didn't make its way to the title company and that money's gone. So I always tell my clients, there's a lot of wire fraud going on. I'm never going to send you wire instructions. If you ever see wire instructions from me, please call me and let me know. The title company will be the only one to send you wire instructions. Typically, most title companies will black out the last 4 digits of the wire instructions so that you're forced to call them and say, hey, is this really from you? So yeah, that's just be careful because once that money's gone, it's gone and there's nothing we can do about it. So there's just a statement in here for protecting us on that. Your finance contingency. So this just says you're going to make your formal loan application within how many days? I usually put 5 days in here. And then you have to have acceptance of, you have to have written loan commitment from the lender by pick a calendar day. Now, how I fill it out, I know some other agents and brokers don't really like the way I fill it out, but I try to line up this written finance commitment to my closing date. So if we're closing on January 10th, I might put in January 9th written loan commitment. Very rarely does anybody call me out on that. So that protects my clients as long as possible. I'll also tell my clients when I'm writing this for them that if the other agent or broker questions that, I think that it's reasonable to have that written loan commitment within 21 days. So if we're doing a 60-day close and I got a 59-day finance contingency, the other agent might take issue with that. And if they want to negotiate that down, I think it's reasonable to do it within 3 weeks time. So that's how I like to fill it out. And I usually let the other agent kind of negotiate that. If they want to negotiate that and shorten that up, I think that's reasonable. Closing. So this paragraph is slightly different on the current contract that you guys will be using. It says, so here we have to elect a title company. On the current copy of our purchase agreement, it actually says American Title Solutions or a blank. So instead of saying lending institution, it'll say American Title Solutions, or then you can write in if you're not using American Title, you're using somebody else, you can fill in that blank.
So if you put a different company, the seller or a seller's agent would assume that you're using the company that's on that line.
So yeah, so that's, we're going to use American Title Solutions unless I fill in something else here. If I fill in Ohio Real, then we're using Ohio Real. Funds will be deposited on a date and transfer shall be on or about a date. I always make these 2 dates line up to be the same. So if we're closing on January 10th, the first one will say funds are due with the escrow agent on or before January 10th, and the title shall transfer on or about January 10th. If you notice that there's a difference here, how it's worded, One says on or before, one says on or about. The money's got to be deposited on or before that January 10th, but if something happens and we can't close on January 10th, we end up closing on January 11th, 12th. That word about is going to cover us. So it gives us a little extra leeway with that. How many days is the word about? I don't know. A court would have to decide that, but my rule of thumb is if you're going to be closing within let's say a week, and if you have to extend it more than a week, then I would get an addendum.
So you put the closing date for both of those dates on line 65?
Yeah, the line 65, I fill it out. The two dates are the same. You might find, and I don't know if productivity coaching teaches you that way, they might say put a day or two in between so the funds are due on January 8th and closing on January 10th. That's acceptable too. I've always just done it to make them the same date. Yep.
So going by that reasoning, would that mean that the signing, the closing and where everybody's doing their signing would happen on the 8th?
No, it would happen when the lender says it can happen. Yeah, because a lot of times the lender will, now if it's a cash deal, it doesn't matter. You can sign today to close on January 10th. It doesn't matter on a cash deal. But the lenders are pretty particular about dates on the signing of all their mortgage documents, and they won't even have their mortgage documents available. So possession. So how I'd like to see possession filled out is possession on or before 6 p.m. 0 days after the recording of the deed, or January 10th, whichever is later. Which means if we don't close on the 10th, we ended up closing a day late on the 11th, whichever is later. Or I'll just write in here time of title transfer. That's how I'd like to see it filled out, either time of title transfer or the date here. But we also know in the last couple of years, we've done a lot more seller possession after title transfer. And if you're using that, there's an addendum, which I'm going to cover at the end of this class. And or I would say see addendum. I would probably put it under both blank days. I would say see addendum. And here I would say see addendum. Title, I explained this to my clients that you're getting a clear title. If there's any liens, the title company is going to catch that and make sure they get paid off from the seller's proceeds, that you're getting a clean title with, the plumber that they didn't pay that put a lien on the property, that's going to get paid off at closing. If there's any title defects, so let's say there's that lien and the seller can't pay it off, the seller does have a contingency here. So the seller shall have 30 days after written notice to remove any title defect. So if there is a defect, they have time to figure it out. If they're unable to do so, the buyer may either accept the title subject to the defect, or they may terminate this agreement. So doesn't happen often, but every once in a while there's a surprise on title, and this may come into play. Prorations. So how I explain this to my buyers when I go through this is basically, there's a lot of words in this paragraph, and most of it doesn't apply to our transaction. I'm talking as if this were a single family primary residence, no tenants, no condo. Most of this language doesn't apply to us because there's no tenants, rents, there's no security deposits, there's no condo association fees that need to be prorated. But what is relevant in this paragraph for our transaction today is the taxes. Because we pay taxes a year behind in the state of Ohio, we pay it in February and in July, and it's for the year before. So our next tax bill will be due it's going to come out in January. It's going to be due in February. It's for the first half of 2023. So right now, today, the seller has not paid any taxes for January 1st of 2023 all the way through our proposed date that I've been using, January 10th, 2024. So you're going to get a proration because the county doesn't care who owns the property. When the bill is due, the current owner has to pay it. But this is for a time when they own the property, not you. We're just going to get you a proration for 1 year plus 10 days of tax credit for the tax proration, so that when you get the bill, you're paying it but you've been credited. You basically got advanced the money from the seller so that you can pay that bill in February. That sometimes takes a little extra talking with a client to understand it, but hopefully we can all work through that. And then the other stuff in here, if you are so now talking to you guys as an agent, not as a buyer. If you are selling a tenant occupied property, then the security deposits should get transferred to the buyer. And if the tenant, we're closing on January 10th, the tenant paid the rent on January 1st, the seller's entitled to 10 days of that rent payment, and you're entitled to 21 days of that rent payment. So that will all get adjusted at closing on the settlement statement. Those are all reasons, by the way, that I like to see that settlement statement before it goes out to a client to sign it, even if it's a preliminary. I just want to make sure that they got the dates right on the tax proration. If there is tenant security deposits or rents or condo fees or homeowners associations fees, that those are all credited properly and adjusted properly. The only other thing in here that we should talk about is the water holdback. So I explain this to my buyers, basically saying, I say, if the seller decides not to pay their final gas and electric bill, that's not your problem. The gas company or electric company will send a collection agency after them for whatever they owe. You're going to call and turn it on into your name, and you'll start with a clean slate. Collections can go chase after them for electric and gas. Water and sewer is different. That goes with the property. So if they skip town on their final water and sewer bill, now it becomes your problem because that's going to end up as a lien on your property. To make sure that they don't skip town on that final water and sewer bill, we're going to hold some money back. Anywhere from $200 to $300 is pretty typical. Most of my sellers, their final water and sewer combined are going to be 50 or 75 bucks, and we're holding 200 or 300. So it's more than enough to pay that final bill and get the balance. So as a seller's agent, I'll tell my seller, don't pay your final water sewer bill. Send that bill to the title company. It's going to be 75 bucks. They're holding 200. They'll pay it for you and they'll send you back 125. Or pay it and then send receipts, but getting those receipts from, at least from Cleveland Water and Northeast Ohio Sewer District, to show that your final bill was paid in full is nearly impossible. So that's why I try to discourage them from actually paying it themselves and letting the title company pay it. Okay, so closing costs. So when I'm going over this with a buyer, I'm going to tell them this section here from line 103 to 117, this is our closing costs. And when I'm doing this with the buyer, I'm going to skip over the entire paragraph that talks about seller closing costs because they don't care. But what the buyer pays at closing, they will care about. So buyer will pay the following through escrow. They're going to pay half of the escrow fee, depending on the title company you use. I think it's usually like $375 to $425 per half. So buyers paying $375, sellers paying $375, or buyers paying $4 1/4, sellers paying $4 1/4. Half of the cost of the insuring premium of the owner's fee policy of title insurance. So I explain this to my buyers, say, in Ohio, the title insurance, so title insurance is paid one time. It covers you forever as long as you own the property. Could cover you for 6 months or 60 years, however long you own the house. It's just paid one time, and it's a buyer's cost, and it's customary in Northeast Ohio that we split it 50-50 with the seller. The cost of that premium doesn't matter which title company we go to, if we're with American Title Solutions or if we're with Ohio Real Title or anybody else. That cost is mandated by the state of Ohio. So it's $5.75 per thousand for the first $150,000. Then it drops down, and I never remember what the next tier is, and it drops down again, and there's several different tiers. Yeah, so sometimes if somebody asks me what all those tiers are to get to their purchase price, I might have to Google it. You might be able to get a copy of something from the title company to give you that breakdown so you can calculate it. Then there might ask you, what does title insurance do? And the extreme example of what it does is somebody from 5 owners ago says, oh, I never sold the property to that person who sold it to, so I still own this property because the next 4 transactions weren't legitimate since I never sold it to begin with. So get out of my house. That's an extreme example, but if that were to happen, then yes, that person does potentially have the right to the house if they never signed off on the deed. And the title insurance would then step in and say, okay, you paid $200,000 for this house. Here's the $200,000 back. Go find yourself a new house. That's obviously an extreme example. A better example that actually came up recently was a fence had been there for a long time, and the developer bought the school behind to build a housing development over there. And the developer said, we did a survey, that fence is on our property, you need to move it. Well, that didn't come up in the title exam or the survey, so the title insurance company took care of that fence. So that's probably a more realistic example than the other one. You're going to pay all the recording fees for the deed and any mortgages. Cuyahoga County, I think it's $4 a page. I think there's an initial setup fee, and then it's $4 per page after that. I tell people it really depends. Your deed is going to be 2 or 3 pages long, and your mortgage could be this big, it could be that big, you never know. Budget for $225, $250, somewhere in that range, and then I think that's a good budgeting point, and then hopefully it's less. And then this language here is also changed on our current contract. So this says $295 additional commission to Keller Williams Living. It's a little confusing, but it's written that way for a reason now, where it actually says that our commission is made up of 2 sections. One is we get paid from the seller's proceeds, and the second way is the $295 from our clients. So the buyer's not paying you the 3% commission, they're only paying you the $295. The new version's a little bit wordy and a little bit confusing, but our attorney wanted it specifically that way because of all the lawsuits at the time were in process. Now we're starting to see some decisions on those lawsuits. So that's why it was clearly written out how we get paid like that from the seller. Buyer elects or does not elect to have a home warranty. Whether they elect to or not, this is coming up later too, but they still need to sign that warranty order form. At the bottom of the warranty order form, it says waiver, and they can sign the waiver if they're not taking it. But they have to either sign the acceptance or the waiver. That's a requirement because America's Preferred Home Warranty will help us with our legal fees if there's a lawsuit with that particular transaction. Only if we've given them the opportunity to have a warranty, even if they rejected the warranty, just to show them that they had an opportunity. You had your hand up.
I wasn't, so, if a seller is offering the property with the warranty, would you say does not elect here, I'm assuming, or would you select that they elected and it was paid by the seller?
If
the seller is.
The seller's offering a home warranty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if the seller's offering a home warranty and it's not our America's Preferred Home Warranty, that they're just offering a warranty and you don't even know what it is, what I would do is I would say buyer elects to have a home warranty from either ask the listing agent what's the warranty that they're offering in the MLS. Or if you don't want to ask or they don't answer you while you're trying to write this offer up quickly, then you could, I sometimes write from seller's choice at a cost of, if you know the price, or if you don't, you can say per contract, paid by the seller.
Okay.
And then still have them do the waiver on the America's Preferred.
Okay.
So if they're getting HSA, that's fine. We still need a waiver on the America's Preferred.
What if the one is for America's Preferred?
Then that's fine. Then they can sign the acceptance. Yeah.
Okay.
Inspections. So you're buying the house as is. but you get the right to know what is as is. And here's the inspections that we offer you. And we're going to say you're going to have a general home inspection, assuming that we're in Cuyahoga County. There's not many septics, water potability and well flow rate. If you're, if you're somewhere that's on a well, and septic, I would check all three of these. Yes. Most of my deals at least are not on septic or well. Water potability is not necessary when you're on city water. But if you're on a well, you want to make sure that it's potable water. Radon, I always check yes, and other, I'll check yes. For days, I typically do 7 days for general home. I'll do 10 days for radon, paid by the buyer. I do 10 days for other, paid by the buyer. And I define other as any other inspection recommended by the general home inspector. If there's a reason why you want a structural engineer in there now, you can put that in here. I'm not an engineer. I don't know what cracks are supposed to look like. Sometimes they're acceptable, sometimes they're not. I'm not going to pretend I know that stuff. So I'll just say recommended by the general home inspector. And then if the general home inspector says, hey, this crack on the basement wall is suspicious, get an engineer in to check it. Then you have the right because you have any other inspection recommended. But if you have particular concern about something, you can always write in structural engineer, mold, whatever you need in there. They're going to initial that they're waiving the right to any inspection other than what's checked yes. And because the way we checked other, it's really leaves the door wide open, right? Oh, one other thing I'll say, just because we're in December and getting close to the holidays, this is how I typically write it, but just be aware of the calendar because the contract does say at the end that days are calendar days, not business days. So if you get closer to Christmas and your inspector is going to be on vacation and you need a little extra time, or you're unsure and you might need a little extra time, you might want to bump those dates up a little bit. Maybe it's 10 and 12 or 12 and 15 or whatever. Just be aware because a day is Christmas is still a day. New Year's Day is still a day. So just be aware of that. After your inspections are done, you have 3 days to elect one of the following. You're going to either accept the property as is. You're going to accept it subject to condition. We found mold in the attic. So as is, everything looked great. No surprises, no material latent defects. Think health and safety when you're thinking these things. Plumbing leak, an electrical problem, a roof leak, those are all health and safety issues. Also, if it's been disclosed, it's not latent. If it's not really open for negotiation. We told you there's a roof leak. Now you can't come back in after your inspection and say I'm backing out because of the roof leak. It was on my disclosure form. It's not really fair game at that point. But if there's no surprises, we're moving forward. We found some defects. We'll still buy the house for $200, but we got mold in the attic. Seller clean the mold in the attic by a licensed professional or qualified professional if it's not a licensed trade. And then we'll still buy the house for $200. Or maybe you get a credit. We'll take care of that mold, but we want a $2,000 closing cost credit or a price adjustment or something like that. That's what happens most of the time with our deals. And then the third option would be that the buyer elects to terminate because they discovered a material latent defect. So if you are going with option 2, you can ask, and the seller does not have to agree, but you have 3 days to come to an agreement with the seller from the day that you gave that. So you have 3 days after your last inspection to provide it. Then after it's provided, you have 3 days. That does not mean 6 days, guys. That means if you provided your request after 1 day, you didn't wait the full 3 days and you sent it over on day 1 or day 2, you have 3 days from that date to figure out if you're agreeing or not agreeing to what your requests were. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Cool.
got a question. I got a question.
Yeah.
So I had in my previous brokerage, I had a buyer who got all the way to the inspection, and the appraisal, the inspection person had showed us where the house was shifting off the foundation
Mm-hmm.
in the back. Like they tried to like cover it up. It was really discreet, but you can really tell, and I'm no expert at that. And so we went back to the seller and said, and luckily the guy who was buying it, he specializes in foundation type of stuff. So he
Mhm.
tried to negotiate that. And the buyer just would not respond. They wouldn't even say yay or nay. And they was trying not to give him his earnest money back.
Mm.
And it was like a big deal, but I couldn't understand, just move on. But
Yeah. So I don't know what the contract said at your old brokerage, but if that were to happen with this particular contract that we're going over today, that's a material latent defect. Even if you could see it,
mhm,
you and I are not engineers, so I wouldn't know that that's a structural problem. Maybe the house was built like that, or maybe it's, I don't know. I don't know about roofs. I don't know about foundation,
mhm,
so we wouldn't be expected to be the expert on that. So when the inspector found that defect, in my mind, it's fair game. And if we don't agree within 3 days, so here in this second bullet point says, if the parties do not agree in writing to the seller's repair within those 3 days, then this agreement shall be null and void, and the parties shall promptly sign a mutual release authorizing the earnest money to be returned to the buyer. So again, I don't know what your contract said in that particular deal, but in this contract, unless it's disclosed, now the seller knew that there was a foundation problem and they put it on their disclosures, then you knew about it when you wrote the offer and you should write your offer accordingly. But
mhm.
assuming that it wasn't disclosed and it was discovered for the first time during your home inspection, if you guys can't agree on how to fix it or who's going to fix it or what the credit's going to be, if you can't agree within 3 days, then it clearly says that the contract shall be deemed null and void, and the parties shall promptly sign a mutual release and earnest money to the buyer. I think that's pretty clear. Now, we can't force anybody to sign anything, right? I mean, our seller, it might be my seller and your buyer, and my seller is going to say, Rick, I'm not signing it. And I'm going to explain to them as a listing agent that, look, they found this defect. And if we can't agree on it, then it says, but if they're going to refuse to sign, I can't force anybody to sign.
Mhm.
Then I would think that going to court would make it pretty cut and dry when the judge or magistrate looks at this and says, okay, well, clearly that's a material defect. It wasn't disclosed. The contract says, that as long as you responded in time and you didn't come to an agreement within that 3 days, the buyer's going to get that earnest money back. I would think that's how a judge would look at it if it goes to court. If that happens to you guys, call me. And the better thing than hiring attorneys to go to court would be for me to call that broker and talk to the broker directly and say, hey, this was the date of our last inspection. We responded within the 3 days the contract required us to. We did not come to an agreement within the 3 days that the contract requires us to. Here it says that the buyer gets earnest money back. Please talk to your seller, and maybe that'll work it out. And if not, then we might have your client call an attorney.
Okay.
Or your buyer doesn't even you found that structural defect, and this happened to one of my buyers. We discovered a structural defect during our inspection period. The engineer came out, looked at it, said, yep, there's something wrong here. The garage is shifting at a faster rate than the house. So now the house and the the garage, or it was an attached garage with a room over it, and they're kind of pulling apart from each other. The engineer said, it's not like you have to tear down the house. We can fix it doing this and tying that and whatever and secure it together. My buyer was not comfortable with it. The seller was saying, I'll fix it. I'll do everything to the specs that your engineer said needs to be done. And my buyer just said, thanks, but we're really not comfortable, even if it is done the way the structural engineer specified it, and they had the right to terminate. So even though the seller was willing to correct that defect, the buyer didn't have to accept it. They had the right to just say, there's a defect and we want to terminate.
So one question, this might be outside of the scope of what we're doing right now, but if the earnest money said non-refundable earnest money, do you have to scratch out all of this?
If the earnest money is non-refundable?
Yeah, like say you were trying to win out of multiple offers, for example, and so that was one of the things that the buyer was willing to do, is say non-refundable earnest money. I remember at a different meeting, you talked about, you can't just put inspection is for informational purposes only, like that.
Yeah, if the earnest money is not refundable under any circumstance, then yes, you would cross it off here, and you would probably have to go through the contract and anywhere there's a reference, because there's several spots where it references that if this doesn't happen, then a mutual release is signed, earnest money delivered to buyer. Yeah, you'd have to, anywhere that's referenced, you'd have to cross that off if that's the case. Yeah. Pest and wood destroying insects, I usually just strike through this entire paragraph. I'll tell you why. The way I wrote the other inspections up here, so if my general home inspector finds something that looks like termite tunnels, then I have the right to do that inspection under other. I mean, you guys can use this paragraph. I just like to cross it off because I don't like the verbiage in here. It says that you'll have an professional inspector or exterminating agency of the buyer seller's choice, paid for by the buyer seller, is going to do the inspection. And if there's anything that needs repair, it'll be paid for by buyer seller. So let's say seller. Great, the seller said they'll fix it, but then it says this agreement may be terminated by the party paying for the repair and treatment if the cost exceeds $500. I just don't, I mean, $500 is a lot of money for a pest problem. I don't think most of the stuff we see in Northeast Ohio is going to be carpenter ants, carpenter bees. It's going to be $50, $100, maybe $150. It's not going to be $500 to have an exterminator for bees or ants. But I just don't like the fact that even if we say the seller will take care of it, that if it's $501, that they can just say, nope, we're terminating. I would rather have an opportunity for them to come to me and say, hey, it's over $500, it's $600. We're only agreeing to pay $5. Would you guys pay the $1? And then we can try to negotiate it. So, I mean, you guys are more than welcome to use this paragraph. I just don't like the verbiage in here, and that's why I usually strike it out. And I always tell my buyers that they're still protected because of the way I filled out the other inspections as deemed necessary by the general home inspector. So, and then it's without any dollar amount. It's
My concern there would be, are we supposed to assume, and it's correct to assume that the inspector would always say there was evidence of some type of pest, you should have another.
Yeah, they should be writing in their report that they're recommending a exterminating company do a further investigation.
So we don't have to question that, because it seems like they could say, well, I'm not a pest inspector. So, but as a general home inspector, they should be doing that, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if they're unsure about something, I mean, I've had my general home inspector tell me they've never seen electrical wired this particular way. He said, I don't know, it might be right, it might not. I've never seen it done this way. Called an electrician. We had another inspection from a licensed electrician. He looked at it and he said, yeah, it's not common, but it's perfectly acceptable. So we got another, he made the recommendation and we had that electrician, and in that case it wasn't a problem. But if it was a problem, then now we have a professional opinion on that particular. So it might be again, structure, it might be electrical, it might be roof, whatever. Yeah, or it might be pest. So
They should make some sort of recommendation.
Yeah. lead paint, I honestly have never had a client do a lead paint inspection. I think that might start. I've said for the last few months that I've been teaching this class, that might start to change because City of Cleveland now has their lead safe program. I think Cleveland Heights and maybe Shaker Heights, maybe Parma. I think there's a couple other communities that are trying to propose legislation that would do some extra lead requirements on rental houses. I think it's a horrible idea for our industry, but that's a whole conversation for a different day. But if your clients are concerned, then they have the right to test it. I've been doing this 17 years and I'm yet to have anybody actually choose to do a lead inspection.
Do you ask them or you just?
No, no, you'll present it, you'll give,
Yeah.
it's gotta be their option.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm a listing agent and I've got, my lead paint disclosure filled out that my seller has no knowledge and has no reports, and I know our house was built in the 1930s, so probably if you test it, it's gonna come back positive. I might be telling my seller, hey, we need to be careful. Right now, we have no knowledge. If they do this test, they have the right to do a lead test. And if they do that, then now we have a disclosure issue. I mean, that might be a conversation I have with my seller. But when we're representing a buyer, it should be their choice. And I find that most people don't care because actually the EPA's, it's not that they don't care. The EPA guideline is if you have lead in your house, make sure it's not peeling or chipping, scrape it, paint over it, it encapsulates it so the lead dust doesn't become airborne. That's all changing with the City of Cleveland's lead safe program, where now they have to test if it's an income producing property, then it's required to have some tests. So you were gonna ask something, Brooke.
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought your hand was going up. Okay, so that's the lead. That they'll initial that they have received a copy of the seller's disclosure and the EPA pamphlet for lead in the home. So we should be giving that to them at the time that we're writing the offer, the pamphlet, and hopefully the seller's filled out a lead disclosure. If the house was built prior to 1978, if it was built 78 or later, then we don't have to do this section. If the house was built after 78 and you don't have a lead disclosure, I wouldn't skip this. I would just check here that you have not received it, have them initial here. And here it says that the buyer has the right to review it and accept it within X amount of days. If this house was built prior to 1978, I would just put NA, that we know it's not going to come. And if it was, I'm sorry, after 1978, I would put NA. If it was built before 1978, we just haven't gotten the lead disclosure, I would probably put 2 days or 5 days, something like that. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question for all the interruptions. So let's say they don't give it to you within 2 days, then do you have a right to terminate the contract?
No, this isn't that they give it to you within 2 days. This is from the date that they give it
I
to you,
got
you have 2 days to review it and
it.
accept it.
And what if you don't, then, if you don't accept it, I mean, whatever they. provide.
Then you can terminate the agreement.
Thank you
Yeah.
for clearing it up, though.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Megan's Law just says that if the seller is aware of any, if the seller's received any notices from the sheriff's department of sex offenders living in the area, that they're required to disclose that to you. I always tell my buyers, not every sex offender gets a postcard sent out by the sheriff. It depends on what the offense was and when it was, or I don't know how they figure it out, but I just know that not every offender gets a postcard sent out. If my buyer is concerned about it, I tell them go check the sheriff's website, because every registered sex offender can be found there, regardless of what their offense was. And you can do a search on the sheriff's website by radius. So you can put in the address and do a search by half-mile radius, a mile, whatever they are comfortable with, and let the buyer do their own due diligence on that. Property disclosures. So the sellers are required in most instances to fill out the state of Ohio property disclosure form. If they filled it out and you've received it, you're gonna check here and they're gonna initial here. If they haven't received it yet, if it wasn't in the MLS, the seller hasn't done it for whatever reason just yet, you're gonna say has not, they're gonna initial, and same thing, that once it's provided, you'll have, I usually put 5 days in there because that might be a little bit more detailed than the lead disclosure. So they'll have 5 days to read through it, make sure they're comfortable with it. If you don't have it, don't let 30 days go by without getting it, because the way the law is written in the state of Ohio is that you have the right to get the disclosures and review them. But if you don't get disclosures within 30 days of a contract, you're accepting it without disclosures. It's very convoluted, and so it's required, but then after 30 days, it's not required, and it's a little convoluted. So I would just say, if you don't have disclosures up to day 30, you can terminate. But then if you don't have it within 30 days, then it's potentially going to be a problem, and your buyer may not have the right to those disclosures. And then there's a few exceptions to those disclosures. There's a form in our dot loop. It's a Ohio Realtor form, and it lists 7 exemptions. So if it's a court ordered sale, if it's a REO property, a bank owned property, if it's being sold by a trustee or an executor, if it's being purchased by a tenant who's lived there for more than a year. So there's 7 different exceptions. So it's possible that there may be an exception to the sale. Possession. This is just saying that you're going to get the possession of the property clean, broom clean. They're not going to necessarily scrub the floors, but it's got to be clear of all the debris and personal property. That if there's any point of sale violations that pop up, then you'll have the right, your buyer will have the right to review those violations. Hopefully, most of the sellers that are selling in cities that have these inspections are doing it before listing, so that you know what they are ahead of time. But if there's a violation that pops up between the time we went into contract and before our closing, then we have they have to disclose it to us, and I'll usually put in 5 days here. So if the city comes by and cites us for the cracked driveway blocks, I have to notify the buyer. The buyer has 5 days to decide they're going to accept it, if we're going to negotiate that, if I'm going to fix it, who's going to be responsible for it, how it's going to play out. Representations and disclaimers. This just says that neither agent has made any representations to the clients about the condition of the property, that the buyer is responsible for doing their own due diligence. Except the only disclosure, the only thing that they're relying on is really the property disclosures. So you're not relying on me saying, yeah, don't worry about that crack in the foundation, is basically what it says. Don't say that. Damage to the property. If the property is damaged in excess of 10% of the purchase price after contract before closing, God forbid a tornado rips the roof off, or a fire or a flood, then the buyer can decide either to accept the insurance proceeds for the damages and continue the closing, which likely won't happen, or they can terminate the agreement. If there's damage to the property less than 10% of the purchase price, the seller has to put it back into the same condition that it was prior to the damages. And then here's a list of all your addendums that you're going to check off what we're using. So always check off agency disclosure. Most likely you're checking off a property disclosure. If you're FHA or VA, you'll check that. If it's condo, you'll check. If there's a home sale contingency or concurrency, lead-based paint. Other, under other, you would put your ABA if we're using America's Preferred Home Warrant, not America's Preferred, what am I talking about? American Title Solution. Sorry. If we're using American Title Solution, you'll check off other, you'll put ABA. if you have your own ABA with a different title company that you're using, then that should be in there too. And anything else, we have all sorts of different addendums that you might be using, so that would be listed there. Binding agreement, telling your seller or telling your buyers that this is binding once it's fully executed, and it says days shall be defined as calendar days. So by the way, the question that always comes up is how do we count our days? So we know it's calendar days. We went into contract today and I have 7 days to do my inspection. Is today day 1 or is today day 0? Today's, what is it?
0.
Right. Today's day 0. So today's Wednesday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By Wednesday, I have to be done with my last inspection. So that's how we count days. Buyer will sign here. If the seller accepts it, they'll sign there. We're going to fill in all of our information here. So the listing agent's information and the selling agent's license number, names and license numbers and things like that. Your license number is not always the same. Most of the time it's the same. Actually, they just updated the MLS. I was going to say our MLS ID is not always our license number. Most of the time it is, but now with the MLS update that came out this week, last week, this week, whenever it was, now they also have a line for our license numbers. So make sure you check that and you're using the right numbers over there. This is our ABA. This is our old one. This is still with Ohio Real Title, but we have the new one with American Title Solutions. So if you're using American Title Solutions, you'll need the ABA filled out. For your protection, get a home inspection. This is a required document in our brokerage. For those of you that might have come from another brokerage, this probably was not a required form. The reason I made it required is because I saw too many people waiving their home inspections, not doing inspections and buying houses without doing their own due diligence on it. And I think that's going to be a problem for us as a brokerage and us as agents. When they move in and they find out that there's mold in the attic and they didn't do an inspection, now it's their problem. So this is basically just explaining to them the importance of, this is an FHA form, but it's required on all of our deals because it explains the importance of having an inspection done. It also says that I choose to have an inspection or I don't choose to have an inspection. So if they chose to skip an inspection, they're signing off on it right here that they know that it's important because we've reviewed this document with them. And if they are choosing, hopefully they're checking the first box. And then if you're giving them any names of inspectors, you're going to give them at least 3 qualified inspectors. So they're going to sign here that they're having it and they've received 3 inspector names. In my own loops, not in this class, but my own personal documents, I also made a separate, I just took a Word document and it just says 3 qualified. Here's a list of 3 qualified inspectors that some of my clients have used in the past. It's got 3 different names. It's got their license number. It's got their contact information. And so when they're signing off that they've received 3 qualified inspectors, the very next page is going to say, here's the inspectors, and they're going to sign off on that they've received that too. So if you guys want to have a document like that, you're more than happy to create one. If you want to steal mine, I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants it. It's it's really that simple. It just says, here's 3 qualified inspectors my clients have used, and then it's got their information. This is the ROC, the removal of contingency. So you're going to fill out the top with everybody's information, the property address, and we're removing the home inspection or we're removing it subject to a condition. If there's conditions, here's a spot for you to list those conditions. If this is not enough room, you can always say see attachment and type it all out on a separate document that everybody will sign.
Oh, never mind. I was looking for the little realtor logo thing.
Right here.
Yeah. I didn't see it at the top. I saw the equal one at the top.
This is the America's Preferred Home Warranty order form. So remember, this is required form. If they accept the warranty, buyer seller will sign here. If, by the way, if the seller's not paying for it and your buyer wants it and they're going to pay for it, or maybe you are paying for a home warranty for them, then you don't need a seller signature. Just a buyer signature would be sufficient here. And then if they're choosing not to have a warranty, or they're getting a warranty from a different company, then they need to sign the waiver down here. So going back to possession, and we talked about ideally you're getting possession at the time of closing, but right now, lately, we've been seeing a lot more sellers staying after closing. This is the state of Ohio's addendum for post-closing possession. This is what we'll use from now on. Any other addendums that we've used in the past should not be used. They should all be taken out of .loop, and that reminds me, if you can help me find it, I think it's still, the old one still lives somewhere in .loop that we need to find it and get it removed. Tunisia might be able to tell you where to find it, because she's the one that told me about it.
Okay. Okay.
But this is the one that we should be using if the seller is staying after closing. And the reason I like this one better than what we use is I think it protects all parties, buyer and seller. So it's fairly self-explanatory how to fill this out. The one thing that I like to do is under security deposit. It says that the security deposit will be held with the buyer, which you could do. I just don't love that idea. Every time I've used this document, I've crossed off buyer and wrote escrow agent. So they'll keep that, call it $2,000 security deposit with the title company. And that way there's no dispute over it. It's being held at the title company. Yeah.
In that same paragraph, then would you cross off line 18 at the end there and put title company as well, or escrow agent as well at the very end of that?
On line 18, so upon determination that the seller has complied with the said terms, buyer shall promptly return the security. Yeah, so escrow agent shall promptly, but the escrow agent is going to require an addendum. So even though the deal's closed, you're still going to have to create an addendum saying buyer and seller agree that the earnest or security deposit will be returned to the seller. And then everybody signs it. And if it's not being returned, if the seller broke a window, then you'll have to comply. The buyer will have to comply with the Ohio landlord tenant laws, which you shouldn't give them legal advice, but I've been a landlord, so I can tell you that I know that if there is damages beyond normal wear and tear, that you'll need to get a receipt or an estimate for it, and then provide that to the seller, to the tenant who's the seller, and say, we're holding 2,000, you broke a window, it's going to cost me 500 to replace it. Here's an estimate, or here's a receipt that I've done it. So we're returning 1,500 to the seller and 500 to the buyer. With either way, before a penny gets dispersed from the title company, there's going to have to be an addendum with everybody's signatures on it. So yeah.
After like when it's time to start dispersing the money, or okay, yeah.
Yeah, because you don't know what the
wait
damages
until-
are
yeah.
until they're out, right?
Okay.
So this is the way the state did this form. Also, I prefer not to leave blanks, although it says here, like, if this line is left blank, it means $100, right? So the seller shall promptly notify the buyer of any repairs in excess of $100, unless it's an emergency. So if there's a $200, if there's a $100 repair, the seller can just, or the tenant or the seller, whatever you want to call them at this point, they can just take care of it and then go back to the buyer and say, hey, I took care of it. Here's my receipt. You owe me $100 for this repair. But if it's a $200 repair, they've got to notify the seller, unless it's an emergency. If it's if it's an emergency repair, then they'll have to take care of it. But I don't love the idea of leaving this blank, even though it says $100 if blank. I would rather you write in $100 over here, so that there's no confusion about any blanks on a form. And that is everything in my class.
Great
So,
job.
all right. Do you guys have any questions on Zoom? Oh, there's something in the chat box. Sorry, guys, I wasn't watching
Yeah,
that.
it was for me. Sorry. I just didn't know when to like interject. I didn't want to just
Oh.
interrupt. Sorry.
Okay.
It's all the way back at the top too. So I'm sorry. It was
That's okay.
something that you had mentioned. Hold on 1 second, honey. It was, I know, honey, 1 second. It was something that you mentioned about, hold on 1 second. Oh, about the, where was it? Right, you're going, yep. I think it was really seriously at the top. It was like what's included in the transaction. If you don't write it in, then the lender will not, it won't be appraised with, yep, you're right there. Right here, yeah. So line 18, 19, 20, 21.
Yep.
You had made a comment really quick about it, and I just had never heard that before. So I just wanted to
Yeah,
you
so
to
chattel is just another word for personal property, right?
Mhm.
So a pool table is a good example that, we want you to leave the pool table in the basement.
Mhm.
So we're going to fill in pool table here. The only thing that I would suggest that if your client is getting a mortgage, that it could potentially cause a problem for the lender, because they're going to say, well, but we're not financing a pool table, we're financing real estate, not personal property. All that furniture that you negotiated in, that's great, but we're not financing that. So for that reason, when I write in something under chattel, I always write in pool table, which has no value.
Okay, which has no value. Okay.
Yeah. And that way it shouldn't be a problem for the lender. I've never had it a problem with the lender when I add those words in there. I've tried to do it without writing that in there, and the lenders usually kick it back, and then we just get an addendum that says the pool table has no value.
Okay.
But it could potentially cause a problem when the lender says we're not financing all of that stuff. We're just financing the house.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Sure. Anything else? If not, then let me know if you have any questions. If they come up later, you can always call, email, text. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so you guys know, I do this class once a month. I alternate. So next month is going to be listing agreements. And then, so it's the same class over and over. So I don't think you guys need, so January will be listing agreements. February will be back to purchase agreement. You're always welcome to come to these classes, but it's going to be the same class in February, but in January, if you want to come to the listing class. So cool. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Mhm.
Thank you.